Hi, I'm Cailey, a librarian here at Mentor Public Library.
And I'm Meg, also a librarian here at Mentor, and welcome to this week's edition of All Booked Up with Cailey and Meg, where each week we talk about different books related to a specific theme. This week's theme, we're going to be looking at the National Book Award. Now, this award is kind of like the Oscars of American books. Their mission statement is to celebrate the best literature in America, expand its audience, and ensure that books have a prominent place in American culture. So we love the National Book Award here at the library. We find that usually every year they nominate some really high quality books. As we've noticed in our selections for today, Cailey and I both kind of had a bent toward their great books that look at history, whether it's fiction or nonfiction. So we're going to be looking at some very cool historical ones today, both winners and nominees. So,
And one thing that's kind of neat this year is, just like everything else, the National Book Awards is exclusively online, and you can join in if you want to. It is this Wednesday, November 18th at 7 p.m., and you can go to nationalbook.org to receive an invite for this event. So I think one of the unexpected perks of the world being in quarantine right now is that you can kind of partake in this thing that's usually a little more elite. So that's kind of exciting. And all the books that we talk about today on our All Booked Up are available for you with your library card through the library physically or online through one of our digital services with your card.
Very good. Awesome. Yeah, so I'll get it started. My first book is called We Are Not Free by Traci, Chee. And this is a finalist from this year for the Young People's Literature Award, so that category for the National Book Award. And it follows a group of Japanese American teens and their life experiences during World War II. So it's historical fiction, but it's very much rooted in a pretty dark page in American history. You know, on top of World War II, there was also in the homeland, horrible life experience for these people right after Pearl Harbor. So in Traci Chee and her author notes, actually this is like her family's history as well. So this is kind of her inspiration for writing this book, was that her family was looked upon as quote unquote dangerous after Pearl Harbor. And so it's a really personal story for her. So it starts in San Francisco, and San Francisco's Japantown, in a world where the recent bombing of Pearl Harbor has heightened tensions for the Japanese Americans living there, so much so that the families are forcibly taken to the Topaz incarceration camp in Utah. So the book follows I think 14 different teens. So it's actually quite a lot of different narrators. I know we've looked at books in the past with different narrators, so there's a lot in this book, but I think what makes it really cool is that for each character, it's almost a mixed media type of book where some chapters and some perspectives are told through letters and postcards, some are told first person, some second person, some in poetry even. So it's a lot of different styles to get each character's perspective on this tragic, horrible thing that was happening to them. So these teens, they all know each other and they're all pretty close. They've grown up together. So once they're sent to this camp, their bond is tested because each person has to submit this questionnaire that pretty much makes them pledge their allegiance either to America or Japan. So if they pledge their allegiance to America, they're kind of agreeing they're willing to be in the American military and kind of denounce Japan entirely. And some of the characters don't want to do that. So the characters that decide not to, devote all of their allegiance to America are called the no-nos, and they're actually sent to a different camp. And some actually agree to join the military and all of that. So it looks at the different decisions that each of these characters make and kind of the repercussions on the whole fabric of their culture and how the impact on that. So I like it for the historical impact. There's lots of images actually in it, which I think is cool. Drawings, maps of like the camp and different things like that. So it's a very interactive book as well. So I think this is a great choice for history fans to look at, kind of an overlooked page in history, I think.
Well, and I like too that it's geared towards teens, because that's kind of a topic that isn't super well covered in school books.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something to kind of open their eyes to what else happened during World War II, because I think a lot of the time World War II is really focused on Europe. Yeah. And there was a lot happening in Asia as well as here stateside, and not all of it good.
Right.
So, well, my first book today is also from this year's list. This is one of the nominees for the Nonfiction Award. It also makes America not look so great, though, because this actually jumps us back over 200 years, though. So this is Unworthy Republic, The Dispossession of Native Americans and the Road to Indian Territory by Claudio Sant. So like I said, this takes us back almost 200 years to 1830, when a policy was passed to formally expel Native Americans from their homes in the East to the Western territories. And I feel like this is a topic that I have learned about here and there, but I don't think I really realized the full gravity of it. And this book is very eye-opening. With this policy in place, thousands of Native Americans were displaced from their homelands, from their ancestral homes, and torn from family, possessions, the only place they've known, and sent west. There were thousands others who were killed or caught an illness of some sort on the trail or an accident, and many who were actually murdered by rogue government officials or people who didn't like them just for who they were. And this is really a truly disturbing scar on the nation's history, and one that I feel like we should know a little bit more about. And this book is at times kind of hard to read, especially when you hear about kind of the cavalier nature in which a lot of these laws and policies were passed without taking into account the humanity of the people that they were moving. And the author has exhaustively researched for this book, both with government records and firsthand accounts. You learn about a lot of the questionable choices made by the people in charge, and the big thing is like greed. The greed for the land, especially to have investors take over the land, which was then largely worked by slaves. So it's a combination of things brought in here. A lot of the time the people were sent off with no place to go, or with maps or directions that would lead them into sort of treacherous terrain or dangerous areas, and especially when a lot of the time they were moving into climates that they were completely unfamiliar with. So read this book if you want some sort of real history on what happened back in the 19th century and how the US really grew. It's not pretty. It's not necessarily something that we're super proud of, I think, but it is definitely worth knowing and learning from history.
Yeah, that sounds really heartrending, but that's a good thing about the National Book Award. They're shining a light, on all the people. When they say American literature, they mean all Americans. So I appreciate that they, highlight these kind of books, to make people more aware. So that sounds like a good one too. My next one, also historical, this takes place post-Civil War. It's called News of the World by Paulette Jiles. Now, this one was a finalist for the Fiction Award in 2016, but it's also interesting in 2020 because on December 25th, it's going to be released as a movie adaptation starring Tom Hanks.
I didn't know that. That's awesome to hear.
I know, and I knew it was coming out, but I didn't know it was coming out so soon. So I have that to look forward to, hopefully. So Tom Hanks' character is the protagonist, Captain Jefferson Kyle Kidd. And it, like I said, it takes place 5 years after the end of the Civil War. Post-Civil War, Captain Kidd has a pretty interesting profession. What he does is he travels from town to town in the Texas, Oklahoma area, and he's actually paid to read newspapers for people who don't know how to read. So it actually attracts a big audience. He goes to like town hall and he'll read even like the minute little details from like local areas to like all across the world. So he's reading all these news. And at one of the stops in Wichita Falls, after he's done reading the news, he's approached by someone to help this little girl. Now, this little girl was kidnapped by Kiowa Indians, and she was recently rescued. And her family, the only family she has left, lives in San Antonio. Well, San Antonio from Wichita Falls is a 400-mile journey, and Captain Kidd is the only one with the wagon strong enough to travel that distance. So he's offered $50. And Cailey, back then in like the 1800s, you don't refuse $50. That's like a huge amount of money. So he takes the money and agrees to travel to San Antonio. So there's a couple issues on this journey. One is that this journey is dangerous. There's rogue thieves on the travel on the, in the desert in Texas that, he has to protect the girl from. And there's also the issue that the girl, she's 10 years old now. Her name is Joanna, and she doesn't really know English anymore because she has actually spent 4 years with the Indians, and she is attached to them and doesn't really trust Captain Kidd. And is like, why are you taking me, away from the people I know? So the heart of the story really is their relationship and how it progresses. And then there's a little wrench thrown in when, as they're approaching San Antonio, the family that Joanna's supposed to be taken to, they may or may not be good people. So Captain Kidd has a difficult decision to make, whether he's going to leave Joanna with this family, even if he doesn't necessarily trust them. So definitely like a thriller. It's like a fast page turner. And I think I can see why it's being made into a movie, because it's like, it has a very thriller-ish nature, even though it's historical fiction, if that makes sense. But
No, and I've definitely heard of that one. Other librarians who run book groups have told me they've had great book discussions with that book in particular.
It is. It's good for that, for sure.
My last book is also from the Young People's Literature section, like your first one. This one won the Nonfiction Award in 2019, so just last year. This is called 1919, The Year That Changed America by Martin Sandler. So another history thing. This book is definitely, it's for the young readers category, but it's definitely valuable for grown-ups too, I think. So 1919, 101 years ago now, was a year that brought about a number of changes in America. So many things happened in that year that affect how we live today, things that happen today. Women's suffrage passed in 1919. There were labor strikes that took center stage in the news, and prohibition was just beginning. It was a big year, among other things. A couple of things that I found very interesting in this book were chapters on a couple things I didn't really know about: the Great Molasses Flood and the Red Summer. So the Great Molasses Flood was a literal flood of molasses in the streets of Boston, Massachusetts.
Wow.
I can't believe I haven't heard about this, because that seems like something that's sort of newsworthy forever. There was a storage tank that held 2.3 million gallons of molasses, and it burst, flooding the streets of Boston. And the flood actually killed 21 people, injuring 50, and had some repercussions that were then felt throughout the United States, especially on the economy. There were also the rumor that on very hot summer days in Boston, you can still smell molasses in the streets. And the Red Summer chapter was kind of enlightening for me because it felt pretty relevant to today's news. It covered the summer of 1919, which was filled with white supremacist terrorist attacks on the Black communities throughout the United States. There were attacks throughout the US on Black communities that often had very deadly consequences. This terrible time was largely attributed to the changes in the workforce. There were a lot more African Americans included in the workforce at this point in time because of job vacancies due to World War I. And there was a sort of continual strife over that. And I'm definitely oversimplifying, but the book has a lot more in it. So all of these different issues are sort of addressed in this book, kind of tying you into the world in 2019. Now, one thing that's interesting, of course, is that there's some things that 2020 just makes you look at differently. But the author does a good job of sort of tying these things in, telling you, here's how this is still relevant. And like I said, it is geared towards younger people, so usually middle school, high school age, but it does have value, I think, for everyone. And it was a National Book Award winner.
Yeah, that's awesome. I, I've had people at the library ask us about that year, actually, since COVID started, the pandemic, just because they are drawn to that idea that, like, isn't it amazing? Around 100 years ago, all these things were happening, and it seems like it's a momentous time in history now as well. So I think that's really interesting. Cool. I like our history picks for National Book
Yeah,
Award.
we didn't even plan this,
I
but we
know.
definitely both leaned really hard into the National Book Award winners that focused on history.
No, so get reading and learn your history, guys. Thank you for joining us. Next week, it's getting almost time for Thanksgiving, so we thought we'd look at cookbooks again that kind of have a Thanksgiving bent, kind of maybe what we enjoy eating at that time of year. I know, Cailey, you do a fun Friendsgiving, so maybe you can give us some tips on what you do for that with your book. Sounds fun.
Usually, not this year, but usually.
Well, yeah, it's of course 2020, a weird year, but we'll see if we can modify it so we can still have a happy Thanksgiving. So thank you guys.
Yeah, happy reading.
Yeah.